Okay, welcome to our Thursday night New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for today, August 17th, 2023, with Fritz Buckallew. Fritz is going to be talking about a book he wrote called A Pitcher's Moment, Carl Hubbell and His Quest for Baseball Immortality. It is not a new book, but very, very important book, and one, we talk a lot about Giants, 51, 54. We go back in time to one of the greatest pitchers in franchise history and baseball history, for that matter. Just a couple of other items. Next week's meeting will be on Wednesday. It is with Artie Wilson Jr. His father was a star in the Negro Leagues and also played on the 1951 New York Giants. He actually is the player who got sent down to the minor leagues when Willie Mays was brought up in 1951. I added 3 more Zoom sessions. I'll be adding a couple more for the end of the year, but on December 21st, we have Eddie Frierson. Eddie does a one-man show on Christy Mathewson. He just did one to celebrate Mathewson's birthday in Pennsylvania this past weekend. Lincoln Mitchell is going to be speaking on November 9th about the 100 greatest players in baseball history. And he'll be slanting that to the Giants franchise, the players who were in the book who played for the Giants.
Recording in progress.
And hold on a second. And December 28th, we'll have our end year party wrap up, go over what we accomplished, what's been good, what's been bad, what we can improve on. Coming up, also, I am going to be renewing our subscription to Zoom so we can continue for another year. I will send out the receipt, knowing that whoever made donations in the past, that's what their money is going for. Last night, I had the privilege of speaking to Giants tourism and the development manager, Chelsea Schoenberg, and some of the tour guys like Russ showed up. It was a really pleasant evening. I had a wonderful time trying to sell this group to the tour guys on what we do here and how knowledgeable most of you guys are, more knowledgeable than me about the New York Giants. With that being said, I would like to introduce Fritz Buckallew. Fritz, we did a little pre-run the other day to make sure everything worked, and it looks like everything's going good here. So Fritz, welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Give it up for Fritz. Fritz, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks for having me. I need one more piece of technical help, though. Can I get rid of this stupid box that says this meeting is being recorded and see something?
I would think you probably have to go where Steve said, that view thing.
No, there's an X in that area. That sentence has an X on it. Hit the
Okay.
X.
Maybe it's got it.
Yeah,
That's
I'll
got
just
it.
talk. I don't need to see anything. Okay, I want to start with thanking Gary and my wife Robin for technical help. My ascent to TV stardom has been long and slow. Robin always used to tell people that Zoom was idiot proof until she met me and she learned they'd come up with a better class of idiot. My full disclosure is that we are in the middle of a moving across the continent, and I was going to at least reread my book, but it got packed away by high school slave labor, so I'm kind of winging it. I did get on the internet and read the Hubbell Wikipedia page, And since I never pass up an opportunity to quote Claude Rains, I was, as he was when they found out there was gambling, shocked that there was misinformation on the Wikipedia page. So I'm trying to just use verifiable facts that I remember. Let me talk just for a minute about the genesis of the book. I was approached by my publisher, who was a workmate of mine, friend of mine in the library community in Oklahoma. And he and his wife started a publishing company devoted to Oklahoma topics. And he wanted me to write a triple biography of the Weiner brothers and Carl Hubbell, who, back in the days before the interstate highways, you traveled east out of Oklahoma City on US 62, and you got to Hera, which is where the Weiner brothers grew up. And then you got to Meeker, which is where Carl Hubbell grew up. I told him I didn't think I was the man for the job. But after I retired, I kind of on my own started on the Hubbell biography, and they accepted it for publication from their house. So with that in mind, and the Weiner brothers do play a role in this, because when Hubbell was growing up, you're talking about a time with larger families and everything, that you could get a baseball game together. But apparently Meeker was just too small, and Hubbell didn't even live in the town. So he talked more about playing games like One Old Cat and those ancestral bat and ball games. It's interesting if you look up in a reference source such as Total Baseball or baseballreference.com, they give his birthplace as a town in Missouri, which is pretty small. And his father was always given to saying that the press guys couldn't even get his birthplace right. He said that was not where he was born. And I looked up the town where the elder Hubbell said he was born, which is even slighter, a community that maybe doesn't even exist anymore. But they moved to Oklahoma when I think Hubbell was about 3, and lived a couple of various places before they moved to Meeker. And when Hubbell was in high school, he approached the principal about starting a baseball team. And as he put it, the principal said, "Who are you going to play?" And they did get the team together, and they did play the team from Hera, which had the Weiner brothers. That would have been fun. And there's a story which I think may be apocryphal, but I'll pass it along, because Lloyd Weiner rarely struck out more than 10 times a season in Major League Baseball. But there is a story that he got so frustrated trying to hit Hubbell one time that he threw his bat into the stands. Take it for what it's worth. Hubbell had 3 minor league stops. He started out in Ardmore, which is a small town in southern Oklahoma, played in Oklahoma City for a season or 2. He credited a fellow who he, as he said, had a cup of coffee with the Senators, I used to know his name, with teaching him the screwball. And I'm not too good on inside baseball and the mechanics of it, but suffice it to say that the secret of the screwball is that the curve breaks in a different direction than what you would expect from the handedness of the pitcher when you just look at it on paper. And after he left Oklahoma City, he went to Beaumont, and I believe it was at that point that he got accepted into the Tigers organization. But Ty Cobb, who was the manager at the time, and apparently other individuals in the hierarchy, didn't like the screwball. They thought it was hard on your arm. So he played in Beaumont and then in Toronto in the Tigers organization, and his results were not good because they wouldn't let him use the screwball. So at some point, a Giants scout came to see Hubbell pitch, and I believe that was in Beaumont. It might have been in Toronto. And apparently, at least he was watching him warm up using the screwball. I don't know the details, but anyway, he called John McGraw and said, I just saw the new Art Neff. And of course, Giants aficionados will know that Art Neff was a pretty solid pitcher on that 22 team. And throughout the early 20s, anyway, McGraw would certainly have been speaking his language. And over and above that, the screwball is basically a version of Christy Matheson's fadeaway, they called it then. And so the whole organization would have been much more receptive to Hub using the screwball. So he comes up to the majors in 27, I think, late in the year. And, you know, as they say, the rest is history. The title of the book, A Pitcher's Moment, alludes to the All-Star game in 1934, where he struck out the 5 Hall of Famers in a row: Babe Ruth, Jimmy Fox, Al Simmons, Joe Cronin, and Lou Gehrig. And the only one of them to even make contact was Fox, who hit a foul ball anyway. And the interesting thing about that, or a interesting thing about it, is he had worked himself into a jam. They started out hitting him pretty hard, and at the time, the press made a lot out of the fact that there was a conference at the mound with 3 managers, since this was the golden day of the player manager. And one of them was his own manager, Bill Terry. But Hub, as he often did, wasn't too cooperative with the press's line of inquiry. He said there was nothing they could do to help me, nothing at all, except they gave me a minute to get my thoughts together. But he went on to set the record for consecutive wins in 1936 and 37, and also scoreless innings. And I don't know if those have been broken. They were pitchers in the 80s, and I want to say Roger Clemens and Oral Hershiser made a run at them. I really couldn't tell you if those records still stand. And about this time, you might wonder, if those of you with long political memories might remember the great 50s debate about who lost China. Well, there was a debate in the Tigers hierarchy about who lost Hubbell. If you remember, those 30s Tigers teams were really good. They won pennants. And one thing they had was a solid rotation, but they didn't have a Hubbell, a standout go-to ace. And of course, Hubbell would have fit that bill immediately. And Cobb was very vehement in one of his memoirs, if you can imagine Ty Cobb being vehement or outspoken at any time, that he didn't lose Hubbell. He blamed it on I want to say George McBride, it might have been Charlie O'Leary. We're talking about ex-Tiger infielder from the aughts. But it was a kind of roundabout thing that he had been traded to the Athletics by the time they quote, quote, lost Hubbell. I don't know one way or the other about that, but it's interesting to read Cobb's side of the story. And so Hubbell had a lot of accomplishment, and he hung it up in 1943. He said Mel Ott was the manager at the time, and Ott and he were great friends. They had roomed together. I wonder if surely baseball players don't have roommates anymore, but when they get away with roommates, we lost a lot of great stories. And he explained it by saying he wasn't helping the team and he knew it, and he went to Mel and told him he didn't think he belonged on the team anymore. And there was surprisingly little coverage of that in the New York press at the time. And immediately at the end of the season, Mr. Stoneham named him head of the farm system. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But I want to talk about Hubbell greatness for a minute. It seems to be pretty obligatory when you write a baseball biography, especially of a pitcher, that you make your case that he was the greatest pitcher of all time. Well, I only found one person in history that said that Carl Hubbell was the greatest pitcher in baseball history, and he wasn't a sports writer. And that was Quentin Reynolds. And Quentin Reynolds was a mainstay of men's magazines back in the 50s and 60s before it meant something just pretty much like softcore pornography. And he was kind of a poor man's Robert Rourke, who was a kind of a poor man's Ernest Hemingway. But anyway, Quentin Reynolds is the one and only person I read that said Carl Hubbell was the greatest pitcher in baseball history. On the other hand, I say in the book that I find it difficult to find a baseball player whose reputation has diminished more in the time since he retired. I saw one of these lists of baseball's best you come up with that rated him as the 15th best pitcher of all time. And there was very little doubt among his contemporaries that he would be remembered in the very top rank of pitchers. Certainly he's right there in the list of 30s pitchers. And his main competitors, of course, both had injury-shortened careers, and those would be Lefty Grove and Dizzy Dean. And the press always played up every little thing when Dean and Hubbell were going to pitch. And Hub was far too easygoing to have a blood feud with anybody, and Dizzy was just too goofy. And I will beg your indulgence while I go totally off the subject and mention my favorite baseball headline of all time, which was one game when Dizzy Dean got hit in the head with a line drive and got taken to the hospital. The next morning, the Globe Democrats headline was Dizzy Dean, doctors X-ray Dizzy Dean's head, find nothing. And so anyway, at the time that Hubbell took over the farm system, it was pretty moribund. For example, at that time, the Newark, the top farm team outfield, was older than the Giants starting outfield. And some teams, you know, I don't know a lot about the evolution of the minor leagues. I'll raise my hand there, but at that time, some teams had pretty well-developed minor leagues, but the Giants, being rich and powerful, could just buy whatever they thought they needed at any given time. So Hubbell really went to work on the farm system. I mean, he was ultra organized, and he really made it into something. If you look at the players that the Giants developed into those 50s championship and pennant winning teams, it goes without saying, Willie Mays, they were in the forefront of Black talent and even more so Latino talent when they moved to San Francisco, especially. I mean, you're talking about a team that could trade Bill White when they got a hold of Orlando Cepeda and went Willie McCovey and move Willie McCovey to the outfield or third base when they got a hold of Orlando Cepeda. I mean, it was just that deep a farm system. And as I say, he was well known for being in the forefront of Latino ball players. He also had a seat at the table for almost everything Mr. Stoneham and the general manager would do if Mr. Stoneham wasn't the general manager, which he probably in fact was. And the press, kind of ironically, because Hubbell was a very taciturn man that didn't have a lot to say, and he was not a good interview. But all of a sudden, in the front office, he became very much the press's go-to guy for inside dope, quotes, so forth and so on. I remember one game in particular, rather late in his career, where he came within a bloop single out of a perfect game, and they expected to get some really good stuff out of Hub, but he was quite philosophical. He just said, well, I guess that's why perfect games are so difficult, and moved on to the next topic. So after they moved to San Francisco, and I'll confess that I didn't have web access to any San Francisco papers, so maybe it's a hole in my research, but I did find that gradually he seemed to lose influence. He kept the title into the 70s, but after the Stoneham sold the team, which you would probably know more than I do about when that was, but I think it was in the 70s. His influence gradually diminished. He still had the title for a while, and then they changed the title slightly, and they said that it was not going to affect his role in the organization, but it clearly did. And of course, by this time he was in his 70s, and probably this new corporate ownership didn't think a man in his 70s was quite up to bringing them their title. And the Giants had been more than competitive in the 60s, but it always seemed like the Dodgers and the Cardinals kind of traded back the NL or later NL West title between them, and San Francisco was always finishing second. And you're talking about a time when we were getting further away from Barney Dreyfuss when he owned the Pirates. All he ever wanted to do, he said, was finish in the first division. And first division probably meant nothing to these people, as it seems to mean nothing to fans today, if there even would be such a thing as first division. I suppose the quote closest equivalent would be playing 500. So very late in the 70s and through the rest of his life, Hubbell just started basically scouting what today would be called the Arizona Fall League. It kind of evolved into that. And he died Thanksgiving weekend in 1988. He was living around Phoenix from where he scouted the Fall League, and he was probably headed to his favorite breakfast spot and had apoplexy and crashed the car. And contrary to what you will read on Wikipedia, he did not die that day. He lingered for 2 days. The family came, and he had the crash on Saturday, and he died on Monday. And let me backtrack a little and talk about his family now. I'm among Giants fans, so I can perhaps get some props by saying I just a while ago finished a biography of the great 19th century superstar Mike King Kelly. And I've always been fascinated when reading baseball biographies about what happened next. And it's really frustrating that they don't know what happened to Kelly's widow. They don't know the gender of his child. I mean, they don't know a lot of stuff about what happened after Kelly died prematurely. And I was sort of in the same boat with the Hubbell family. He had 2 boys by his first wife, and Carl Jr. and Mike. Not Mike, Jim. Carl Jr. played briefly in the minor leagues, according to the Wikipedia page. I can't say I remember that too well. I wouldn't be surprised if Jim played some minor league ball in Nebraska, because I live in Hastings, Nebraska. He lives just down the road here in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's our state capital, 100 miles east of here. And I called him and kind of sort of hoped he would help. And he said he might help. And then he said he would call Carl Jr. and find out whether he should help me. And he never called back. But, and I didn't say it to him, but a long time ago, somebody told me, if you have a chance to tell your side of a story to an author, you had better do it, because it's otherwise probably not going to get told. But be that as it may. I had a pleasant conversation with him for 15 or 20 minutes. And I mostly wanted to ask him about a topic that never fails to intrigue everybody, which was, ask me about your grandchildren. Hubbell had a nephew. Well, let me backtrack a little. Hubbell had a brother that went to training camp with the Giants a few times. And I know surely you New York Giants aficionados have had a chance to pull the joke trivia question of which 2 brothers in Major League history have the most wins. Of course, the answer is Christy and Henry Matheson, with 474 and 0 between them. But the brother never made the majors. But I think it was the brother that played minor league ball. His son was a decent outfielder for the Southeast Oklahoma State Savages, which is in Durant, Oklahoma, and is a great program. You can, if you wish to research it, find all those players they sent to the bigs, and you've heard of a lot of them. But it's in Durant, or if I want to go full frontal, Okie Durant, Oklahoma. And they've got signs commemorating a lot of them around the outfield wall. But anyway, Hubbell had a grandchild that played golf on a collegiate level. And after that, I lost track of all of them. Another thing you won't learn from the Wikipedia page is that Hubbell was married a second time. And it's next to impossible to find out anything about her. St. Louis sports writer legend Bob Brogue took the time to say she was an attractive brunette, and that's all I ever found out about her. I talked a lot. This book could not possibly have been done without the help of the lady who founded the Carl Hubbell Museum. Said she was very helpful in setting up the Carl Hubbell Museum. And so she must have played some kind of role in his life after they divorced or whatever they did. If I did not mention this, Hubbell's first marriage broke up sometime in the early 50s. She moved back to Oklahoma, died rather prematurely in the early 60s. And so, and the museum was set up before Hubb's death, because he's there at the whatever founding, coronation, establishment of the museum. And in addition to Jim Hubbell, I talked to a Hubbell nephew, but he really didn't know very much, and I couldn't say I could be too helpful. And if somebody wanted to write a biography of one of my uncles either. You could track Hubbell's later life, at least in Oklahoma terms, to some extent by him being in the oil investing business. In fact, once in a while, he would threaten Mr. Stoneham that he was going to go back to the oil patch if he didn't get that extra $225 this season. Even that faded out in the 50s. The state newspaper, the Daily Oklahoman at that time, had a Talmudic coverage of the oil industry. And when you do searching online, you get every mention of Carl Hubbell, and often in the 50s, it would be in the oil investment land transaction section of the Oklahoma. And that's close to it, but let me add a little bit about Carl Hubbell tourism. As I mentioned, there is a Carl Hubbell Museum, which is in the Meeker City Hall. And it actually, the main thing, especially for my research, is a scrapbook that's behind closed doors. It's not behind closed doors, really. It's in a display case. And the museum is kind of the tail wagging the dog to the Meeker City offices. And the ladies that run the city offices are okay, but they were not about to let me look at the scrapbook. The woman who founded the museum showed up and she told them to let me into the display case and have the scrapbook. And I probably learned more from that than I did everything else put together. I don't know who did the scrapbook. Maybe it was his wife, maybe it was his mother, I don't know. Unfortunately, there's no attribution to any of it. My book does have a bibliography, and there's a lot of uncredited clipping, Carl Hubbell Museum scrapbook in it. There is also a Carl Hubbell collection at the public library in the county seat of Chandler, which is 15 miles north or so. When I was talking to Jim Hubbell, he said that the museum had never taken off quite the way the town wanted it to, and I don't know if he had done more than suggest this, but they really need a sign on the interstate. The interstate runs within, I'm going to say, 3 or 4 miles of Meeker. It's not quite on it. And to get to the Carl Hubbell gravesite, if anybody ever makes it to Meeker, you go into the cemetery, which is south of town, off the highway, make a right turn, and go to the end of that road and make a left, and don't drive very far, and you will find the Carl Hubbell gravesite. There's a picture of it in the book. It says, it's very modest. It says Carl Hubbell, the meal ticket, with his birth dates and death dates. And I think that's about all I have to say, Gary. You said these people ask questions once in a while.
Fritz, thank you so much for being so informative. What is the best way to get your book? Amazon, or do you know a better way?
Well, you helpfully put a link into it. So I would try that. That will probably work as well as anything. It's probably also on bnn.com. I don't know that it has enough punch in the used market to be on a Libris. The publishing company, so for those of you who are not as rich as Gary and me and want to use your public library's interlibrary loan, the publishing company is called 46th Star Press, which is a kind of inside Okie reference to it being the 46th state in the Union. As far as I know, the publisher is now defunct. She had some health issues a few years ago, and I don't know if it ever came back. The last time I looked, it had a website, but I don't think they were selling books that I could tell or putting out any new books. So yeah, try Gary's link in your email, I think.
Okay, I got one comment and two quick questions. Who came up with Meal Ticket as his nickname, and what's it in reference to?
Well, I suspect that that's a New York journalistic thing. You know, journalists had to have snappy nicknames back there. The Big Train, the Mail Ticket. And I suppose it's a reference to that he was their moneymaker. People came to see Carl Hubbell. And that's as close as I can figure. It's not a nickname he liked, and I'm sure they didn't go around the dugout saying, well, Meal Ticket, what did you do? How'd you do that inning? He was just Hub to them.
Right. My other question is, I am familiar with Randy Johnson, Steve Carlton. I've seen clips of Sandy Koufax. Where do you feel Hubbell rates? You talked about all-time pitchers. What about all-time left-handed pitchers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And let me start out by talking about screwball pitchers. The screwball is not quite extinct. I mean, Fernando Valenzuela is the most well-known from that period. And Hubbell really could pay respect to pitchers. He was a big fan of Roger Clemens, and he was not given to complaining about salaries or anything. Once in a while he would, but for the most part, he just kind of was very Hubbell and said they deserve what they can get. I would have gotten it too. It's difficult. You just said Koufax is a left-hander?
Yes.
Okay. It's hard for me to evaluate pitchers like Koufax because it's hard for me to believe that anybody was a better pitcher than Sandy Koufax for those few years in the 60s. But it took him a long time to get there. If you look at his statistics from the 50s in the encyclopedia, you would have traded him for Rocky Colavito and a double-A catcher. And then all of a sudden he just strikes gold. And in a sense, Hubbell had a great longevity, but he was a little late coming to the majors at age 24. And that first season, he only pitched to like a 3-3 record or something. I mean, a lot of pitchers, I've noticed I have nothing to back this up except my looking at statistics. But a lot of times you see batters and they have a great first year and then it's kaput. Pitchers, it seems to me the other way around. If you look at the Braves pitchers of the 90s, Smoltz and Mad Dog and Glavine, their first year, those statistics don't say a thing. I'm surprised they didn't get traded. And then all of a sudden they come on, and it seems to happen that way with pitchers. I'm at a loss.
Fritz, thanks so much. One other thing. Do you have the ability to see anything right now on the screen?
I'm still looking at this meeting is being recorded, and you're poking your head around the corner of it so I can see you.
I will ask you another question later, but let's get some other people involved here. We're going to go to Mars, Jeff, Bill, and then Dave. Mars, you're up.
Thank you for joining us, sir. I have a couple of statements and a question. First question is, are Hubbell's sons still alive? Did you mention that?
I don't know. Carl Jr. would be in his 80s and Jim would be about 80. So, you know, the way people live now, and you're not going to see an obituary of them. I theoretically could probably catch an obituary of Jim in the Lincoln paper if I got it. And that reminds me, there is a great, I don't know how available it is online. There is a great picture in the Daily Oklahoman circa 1949 of little Jimmy Hubbell out on his sled in a snowstorm.
Wow.
But as to whether they're still alive, I'll plead innocent.
Well, I wanted to mention about Sandy Koufax. So my pop took me to the Polo Grounds, and the Giants were winning by a big margin that day, and they brought in Koufax for garbage time because he had no control then. He was like a pitcher the Yankees had, Ryan Duran. He could throw the ball at the screen, you know, and back, you know, where the stands were. He had no control at all. Well, he was scouted, I think, at the University of Cincinnati because he threw a basketball across court with great velocity. So that's, but of course, as you mentioned, and we all know, Koufax was great in those years. Now, the other thing is about, to me, although, you know, I like to be biased, but I have to say that to me, Walter Johnson was the greatest pitcher because he was on a last place team and he won 426 games and he had the most shutouts. Then you got Mathewson. The other thing about Carl Hubbell, when my father at 18 worked for Harry M. Stevens, it was a doubleheader against the Cardinals and against Tex Carlton, who was taken out in the 15th inning. Hubbell pitched an 18-inning, 1-0 shutout and did not walk a batter. You know, so that you know, truly that is even greater than the Marichal Spahn game in my mind. So, you know, like as far as left-handers, he's probably in the top 5, and as far as all-time pitchers, he's probably in the top 10. Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
And
Mars.
I would agree that probably the consensus is that either Matheson or Johnson were the greatest pitchers of all time, unless you want, there's a lot of people talk about Nolan Ryan, for example, and I don't have an argument with that, but it is sort of becomes apples and oranges. It was such a different era.
Well, right, because, you know, it's like comparing Otto Graham with Joe Montana, and then Brady years later is a different game.
Thank you, Mars. Bill Klink, you are up.
Okay, thank you very much. Always one of my favorite pitchers, though I never saw him pitch, but he is a hallowed giant. And, you know, you mentioned about screwball pitchers. You know, the screwball comes from the left and the right side, and all we have to do is look to that great game between Spahn and Marichal. Both threw a great screwball, and it seems to have fallen out of favor. I know about Valenzuela and all that, but no, I think people are afraid of the arm problems and all of the things that can plague you on that. I wanted to say, you know, nobody can take away from his success on the mound. I mean, gee whiz. What he did in the All-Star game can never be duplicated. Why? Pitchers don't pitch that long. So they're not going to get the chance to throw that many consecutive strikeouts. So that one's pretty much in the books. I guess where I would ask you to think in another manner would be in terms of when he was the head of scouting in the farm system. You know, I wonder if you would comment on how much of that success was really due to people like Jack Schwartz and Eddie Montague, Tom Sheehan, and of course, George Genovese, the greatest scout of all time. I mean, he put together some kind of scouting group, and he was a humble man. I know that because he wrote me a short note. I'll leave you to comment on this. I have a note I'm reading right now, a short one from Carl, dated April 17th, 82. Mr. Klink, Jack Schwartz handled all of the paperwork in signing Willie Mays. I had nothing to do about it. a very humble man, but I wondered if you might comment about, the team that he really put together in the farm and scouting department.
Yeah, let me just comment on Valenzuela for a second. Hubbell said that Valenzuela wasn't really throwing a real screwball, whatever a real screwball might be. So I don't, as I say, I don't know zip about baseball mechanics, but that just reminded me of that. And yeah, I really don't know about the assembly of the staff, but I do know that he would have been very meticulous on picking his staff and everything. He was just that kind of hyper organized individual. And you all probably know this story, unless it's apocryphal, but Hubbell told the story that he had sent the scout to Alabama to look at a first baseman. And he said he got a phone call that night. That first baseman won't do, but there's a center fielder out here you really need to send somebody to look at. And of course, that was Mays.
He put together the greatest farm and scouting department, certainly in the 50s and maybe a tad bit into the 60s. But that's not part of the lore of Hubbell. Really, the lore is obviously what he did on the mound, but he probably doesn't get his due for what he assembled. As you say, his management skills.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had no idea when I started the book he had a administrative career, and one of the few reviews of the book on Amazon said he had no idea he had a successful career as an administrator. I mean, Hubbell was not much of a self-publicist.
That's true.
Thank you, Bill. Jeff, you are up. Jeff, then Dave, then Paul.
And me, I'll go last.
And then Frank. Jeff, go ahead.
Sorry, the hand kept popping on and off. I wasn't touching it.
No, I got you.
My question was, how common during Hubbell's times was the screwball? Was it unusual? Was he like the only guy doing it? And was that like his only? It was obviously his main pitch. Was that like his only pitch?
Well, he self-evaluated the fastball in later years. He said he thought his fastball sat in the low 90s. Of course, nobody could know. And as for how common it certainly wasn't unknown. It was more prevalent than I would think. But the press did play it up as something somewhat unusual. The press coverage of the 34 All-Star game kind of implied that part of the problem these guys were having was that they were unfamiliar with the screwball. And when the Senators played the Giants in 33 in the series, they brought in a screwball pitcher from my team, the St. Louis Browns. If you all thought you were frustrated with your team, this Browns pitcher just threw them screwballs in batting practice for a couple of weeks before they faced Hubbell.
Are you surprised that it's not many people throw it now? Obviously, I mean, with all the Tommy John surgeries and stuff that go on, it's kind of unusual that he was able to use that so much back then. Are you kind of surprised that really nobody, throws it at all anymore?
Yeah, I am. I mean, if I were a baseball executive, I'd be looking at these guys trying to throw 101 mph halftime in ninth inning when I was looking at why there were so many TJ surgeries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Dave Lippman, you're up.
Okay, first I want to thank you for that unbelievably fascinating short version of King Carl Hubbell's life. I wanted to share with you 3 points about Quentin Reynolds you were probably not aware of. First, he was actually a better writer and reporter than you give him credit for. He was a superb war correspondent for Collier's during the Second World War. And I know this because I read both his own autobiography and the book that Louis Neisser did when Reynolds had to sue Hearst Publications in general and Westbrook Pegler in particular for defaming him in a 2 Pegler columns in the 50s. And Reynolds won a bunch of money. They're basically calling Reynolds an adulterer, a crook, and a absentee war correspondent, and so on. And Neisser and Reynolds put Pegler in his place. The second thing is that Reynolds was also a huge New York Giants fan. And this was during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and he refers to it in his autobiography, which is called By Quentin Reynolds. And one of the things he ends the book is how when he's being cross-examined on deposition by the Hearst lawyer says, Louis Neisser and I have crossed swords many times. We remain great friends. This is nothing personal. By the way, I'm a Giants fan too. And at the very end of the book, the case is won, and the first lawyer, Victor Henry was his name, congratulates Reynolds in the win. The case is over and done, no more appeals. And Reynolds said, well, if only the Giants can win the pennant, this was 1954, I'll be very happy. And Henry said, I think they have a chance. I'll see you at the Polo Grounds. And when Reynolds was giving his direct testimony, I think everybody here will enjoy it. Henry asked him, well, did you really mean it when you say you give your left arm to support Stalin in World War II? This was the height of McCarthyism. And Reynolds said, well, I also would give my left arm to see the Giants win the pennant, but I don't think I want to see, I don't think Leo Durocher wants to see my left arm in a flower pot. But my point is that Reynolds was not the most unbiased observer, as good a reporter as he was, and he was a tremendous reporter. He covered the Russian front from the Russian front. He covered the invasion of Dieppe from a ship off the raid in Dieppe. He covered battles in North Africa from trenches and foxholes in Libya and Egypt. He covered the invasion of Normandy, the invasion of Iwo Jima. So, he was no joke at the writing plate. But as you say, he's not a sports writer. He was a Giants fan. So I find it, it would be difficult for somebody like him to stand there and say, well, I think Don Newcomb is the best pitcher in the majors because, he'd get torn to bits by guys like us. So I didn't know if you knew that. You can probably get your hands on My Life. You can get your hands on My Life Report. That's Neisser's book on Amazon, on Kindle. By Quentin Reynolds, I don't know. I just got my copy paperback in a used bookstore somewhere, and I'd have to look it up. But if you want some help in looking them up, I'll be happy to help you out.
Thank you, Dave. Paul Ellis, Graham, you were up.
Fritz, thank you so much. That was a great story. I was a Giant fan for a long time, but I'm a lefty and I don't have any speed. I don't even have much of an arm. I have no muscle in my arm. So Screwball might have helped me out. My question is, my question is, I have 2 questions. One is, does the term screwball originate with Carl Hubbell? And number 2, what types of arm issues did he develop, if any, from throwing the pitch?
Well, the derivation of the term is unknown to me. I only know that in Matty's day, it was the fadeaway. And the screwball is basically the same pitch. He had no major arm issues while he was playing. However, later in life, he walked around with his left hand facing outward instead of inward like everybody else does.
Yeah.
So it did have an effect. And I will say that late in his career, he said that he was not throwing the screwball very much anymore. And he implied that that was because he couldn't, or it didn't have the same efficacy. And perhaps that's a little more than the usual decline in age you see in a pitcher as they get past mid-30s. I don't know, but he did say he used it much less, if at all, after, say, the 1940 season or so.
Okay.
And the Giants had relapsed, of course, as you all know, into mediocrity at best by then. So it's not as though the team was going to go anywhere with or without him.
Okay, thank you, Fritz, very much.
All right. We're gonna go to Frank Lewis and then Kim Rupert. You have a lot of comments there. If you want to make some of those comments out loud, you could speak after Frank, and then we'll go to Ed Freer. Frank, you are up.
Yes, Fritz, do you have any observations concerning Carl Hubbell being an actor playing himself in the movie The Big Leaguer?
I could not hear that.
Let me see, maybe when on mute. Carl Hubbell played himself as an actor in the movie The Big Leaguer.
Carl Hubbell played himself in the movie The Big Leaguer. What now, Frank?
Yeah, that's right. He was in that. He had some pretty interesting observations on his career in Hollywood, such as it was, too.
Anything else, Frank?
That's it for tonight.
All right. Kim Rupert, if you unmute, you may make your comments. Kim is the granddaughter of Horace Stoneham. Fritz?
Yeah, hi guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So Fritz, gosh, that was so fantastic. It's just so wonderful hearing all you guys talk and all of the guys in the Preservation Society. So thank you. Mr. Hubbell was just like everything what Fritz said, just a super nice, very humble man. I remember I would go up to my grandfather's box and sit there with my grandfather and usually Hank Sauer, sometimes Charlie Fox when he wasn't managing, of course, that was afterward, Tom Sheehan, a bunch of guys. And Mr. Hubbell would always stand in the back by the doorway, never say a word unless he was asked specifically, but would just stand there and watch the game with everybody else. Sometimes I mentioned to Gary that if a batter got a hit off of an 0-2 count or a 1-2 count, all of the guys would kind of grumble and who threw that one pitch? And it was kind of funny. And Mr. Hubbell would kind of do the same thing. He'd shake his head and just kind of say, yes, you know, can't let a guy get a hit off of an 0-2 count. So just to reiterate, he was one of the nicest, quietest man, like in the ballpark.
Thank you so much for your comments, Kim. Don't be a stranger.
Okay, thanks.
Ed Freer, you're up.
All right, thank you once again. It's probably a very simple question, and maybe there's no answer. Everybody said how taciturn he was. But Mo Resner's documentary shows Carl at the last game at the Polo Grounds. Did he have any feeling, express anything, even though he didn't say much about the move to San Francisco?
I think the answer to that is no, certainly at the time. He did occasionally seem a little Oh, regretful at things like the Polo Grounds being torn down. I mean, how could you not? Even fans were a little misty-eyed at it. But his loyalties clearly were to the team and to the Stoneham family. And if Mr. Stoneham wanted to move the team to San Francisco, I'm sure Hub would have said, that's fine, it's your team. And if I could go back to the last commenter about how nice a man he was, that was one thing he did right up to the end. I don't know how much they valued his scouting there at the end when he was up in his 80s and so forth, but he was very much a glad hander and apparently was reasonably willing to do it, even though it wasn't really in his nature to be outgoing or anything. But when he would be there at spring training and make himself very available if somebody on the team wanted to point him out and tell people to go up, and he'd love to talk to them if they'd introduce themselves.
Thank you, Ed. Judge,
Thank you.
you are
Thank
up.
you.
Yeah, I'm certainly well aware of the consecutive strikeouts in the All-Star game, but I'm not as well versed probably as the others on that appearance in the All-Star game. How many batters did he face? What did the other guys do? What did that appearance look like?
Well, the National League lost the game. That's the first datum. I don't know if they had that 3-inning maximum at that time, but if they did not, and of course now nobody pitches anywhere close to 3 innings, but there was clearly some kind of unwritten rule that you got a lot of people on the field, but they did lose the game. So, and that's about all I know about it, except that he didn't pitch a super long time. I think he pitched about 3 innings.
Do you know if he gave up any runs that day?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if he gave up any runs?
I don't know. I do know I don't think he did. The closest he came was that jam that I mentioned. If they got a run off of him, it probably was then, because I'm not sure he even came out for the next inning, because the strikeout streak was broken, I think, by Bill Dickey with 2 outs
With a
in
single,
that inning.
and then
And I
left
don't
it
know if he
over
got a
and
hit or
came
just
up.
grounded out or whatever.
Thank you, Jim. We're going to go to Bill to finish us off, and then I have one last question for Fritz. Bill, you're up.
Thank you, Gary. Fritz, thank you for your presentation. It's very knowledgeable. I just wanted to add, because everyone's talking about the great Carl Hubbell, he was the first player to win the MVP award twice. And when he won it in 1936, he became the first unanimous player to win the award. That says a lot.
Yeah, and I did not know those things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. Fritz, I don't know if you're aware of this because you're in Nebraska, but in April of 2016, Hawthorne, New Jersey honored Carl Hubbell with Carl Hubbell Day. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Okay, I hope you don't mind if I read this to you. I think you and the rest of the guys would find this very interesting. So the Hawthorne, New Jersey asked the Giants to come down to honor Carl Hubbell. They cannot send anybody out, so they reached out to the Giants Preservation Society. So I went down there, and this is a proclamation given to all of those who went, and it reads as follows. And Fritz, I can get you a copy of this if you so desire. I'll mail it to you. Whereas Carl Owen Hubbell, Baseball Hall of Fame pitcher who helped the New York Giants to the 1933, 36, and 37 World Series, bought the house at 474 Hawthorne Avenue in 1946 when he was the director of the Giants farm system. This is now home to Mr. and Mrs. Robert Cooper. And whereas Mr. Hubbell was married to Lucille Harrington and had 2 sons, Carl and James. Hawthorne's Board of Health records show son James contracted whooping cough on June 10th, 1947, and son Carl contracted whooping cough on May 31st, 1945. Both were treated by Dr. Roylans. And whereas Mr. Hubbell was a lefty known for his masterful delivery of the screwball, as quoted in the New York Times, and whereas Mr. Hubbell was nicknamed the meal ticket and King Carl, and perhaps best remembered for his performance in the 1934 All-Star Game, when he struck out Ruth Gehrig, Fox, Al Simmons, and Joe Cronin in succession. Whereas Joe DiMaggio once called Mr. Hubbell the toughest pitcher he ever faced. Whereas over a career that spanned 16 seasons, Hubbell won the National League Most Valuable Player Award in 1933 and 36, pitched in 3 World Series, netted 5 straight 20 winning seasons. Now, therefore, I, John Smart, Mayor of the Borough of Hawthorne, in appreciation of the gift given to the library project from the San Francisco Giants in Mr. Hubbell's name, officially proclaim April 24th, 2016 as Carl Owen Hubbell Day, signed by John Smart, Mayor.
That's great.
And that's why I didn't know if you could see, but this is a proclamation. This is the paper that we received, and this reads, this ticket admits bearer to all events Carl Hubbell Day in Hawthorne, New Jersey. So, Fritz, if you need a copy of this, just let me know. I'd be happy to send it to you. We got
Sure.
one more question. Steve, you're okay? Anybody?
No, for some reason, I thought it was Hallworth. I don't know, Jeff Hennig, is Hawthorne in Bergen County?
Did I say Hawthorne? I'm sorry, Hallworth.
Hallworth, New Jersey, yeah.
If I mispronounced it, I am so sorry.
No, it's all right.
Hallworth, New Jersey. Hawworth.
Correct. That's
The article,
around,
Gary, he's
Yes.
from the newspaper, from the Star Ledger.
Barry, were you there
David.
that day with me?
Yeah, that's why I got the article.
Okay,
This was
quite
in the
a while
Star
back.
Ledger.
Anybody else with a question before we say goodnight to Fritz?
Gary.
Yeah, Gary, I got something.
Go ahead, Russ, and then Paul. Russ, go ahead.
Okay, so I went to the baseball. I went to the baseball encyclopedia. So Hubbell pitched 3 innings, up no runs, and then the American League busted open for 2 runs in the 4th off of Lon Warnicki and Van Lingle Mungo, and then the American League won 9-7. So
Thank you, Russ.
Hubbell pitched 3 shutout innings.
Nice. Paul, do you have one last comment?
Yeah, it's an addendum to what was just said. He went 3 innings. He struck out. He gave up 2 hits, walked 2, and struck out 6.
Thank you, guys. So again, any of you interested in Fritz's book, I sent out the link on Amazon. You can find it in other places as well. But Fritz, don't be a stranger, man. And thanks so much for having the ability to sign on and for us to see you. Let's all give it up for Fritz Buckallew.
Thanks a lot.
Really appreciate
My pleasure.
it. Great job. So we will see each other next Wednesday night when we have Artie Wilson Jr. Until then, good night. If you guys want to hang out, talk Giant baseball, we will be here. Have a great night, everybody.
Night.